Well, thank you. It's lovely to be here. And actually, I think what's true for all of us is really the most remarkable thing is that God even ever considers us. That's a remarkable thing to me, and it's been brilliant. I'm a #1 fan of Your Home Made Perfect, so I'm done. I've met the host of that, so that's fantastic. And I said that for a reason at the beginning, is because what I want to do is tell you about 3 very special people who've shaped my life as a scientist, and then share that with you and see, hopefully that will give you an idea that all of us can have impact. So about 40 years ago, when I was at medical school, I was absolutely convinced that I was going to be an adult neurologist. No question in that. I knew that would be neurologists, for those who aren't sure, are very, very clever people who get paid a lot, but they can't really do very much. But actually, I was put in my first week of first year on a paediatric ward, and I watched Katie die of a brain tumor. And it completely changed my life, completely. I met her parents, and then that week, I was in the National Gallery, and I saw a painting called The Doctor. Some of you might be familiar with it. And that picture is of a child very sick lying on a bed, a doctor who's completely perplexed. But dark in the corner are 2 weeping parents, which is something I just witnessed. And then that Friday, I was in the pub. God sort of does things in 3s sometimes. I was in the pub with one of my best friends, and he was always a bit drunk. And he sat up, and he went, "Richard, it doesn't matter what you do with your life. You've got to be responsible for a 15% reduction in the death of a disease." And then he collapsed. And for me, that was my nunc dimittis. I knew at that point that what I needed to do for my life was to get rid of children's brain tumors. And so to achieve that as a young doctor, I knew I had to go to the best place in the world to do that. So the first person I want to tell you about was Katie. The second person was a guy called Danny Thomas. So I went to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, where Elvis lived. And the reason I went there, it is still the best hospital in the world for children with cancer. Why? And that is because Danny Thomas, when he was in his 20s, was an out-of-luck, failed entertainer. And he prayed to St. Jude, the patron saint of hopeless cases, "If you restore my fortunes, I will build a shrine." 20 years later, he's a Tony-winning actor on Broadway, multimillionaire. And he goes to the Catholic emissary in Chicago, where he's living, and said, "This was my pledge. I'm going to build a shrine." Now, that Catholic emissary was very smart, because he said, "Don't build a shrine. It's a total waste of money." He said, "Build a children's hospital." And then what he said is, "Don't build it in Chicago. Find the most impoverished, most segregated, worst place in America you can find and build it there." And he went to Memphis. And he built it on the banks of the Mississippi. And in 1962, when it opened, black, white children, it gets me upset to think about it, black, white children were treated for free from 1962 in the most segregated part of America. And that was his faith. And I got to go there. And I learned how to be a scientist. And I learned what it was about children's brain tumors. Now, back then, even 20 years ago, children's brain tumors were diagnosed in a really terrible way. We would look down the microscope and we'd go, "That looks a bit like an ependymoma. That looks like a medulloblastoma. You need this." Absolutely terrible way of doing it. We knew that some of those children would survive and some of them would die. We didn't know who they were. And then I looked into the site of those diseases, and I want to just take a little bit of a moment to say you can worship God anywhere. For me, the most profound worship I've ever had has been in the lab, peering into the bowels of creation, the nuts and bolts that make us work. And I've been stood with my hands in the lab going, "This is amazing. Thank you, God." People think I'm mad, but that's okay. But looking into the bowels of creation, wherever you are, you can worship God, because you witness him all around. Let's never close our eyes to the reality of God. He isn't in this building. He is everywhere. Anyway, back to the lab. So one thing I realized is that David, who did a great talk at the beginning, you can tell he's posh and from the south because of his accent. You can tell I'm not. I'm from the north because of my accent. And what I realized is when we looked into the tumors of children, the genes that they were expressing were just regional accents. And so what we realized is when we looked at the genes that were being expressed, actually that gene in that cell was sharing the same regional accent as this part of the nervous system. And we had an amazing eureka moment when we realized that these children were behaving differently in the clinic, responding differently for tumors, because their tumors were born in completely different parts of the nervous system. So we were able to then go on and see that all of these different tumors that we were calling the same were very different because they were born in fundamentally different places. Just like you are born in fundamentally different places, your background's different. That's true for tumors. So I was there 15 years, amazing place. But Danny Thomas, because of that act of his faith, meant that I could learn about children's brain tumors, which was fantastic. So then I went to somewhere I thought I'd never go to, which is Cambridge. So I got asked if I'd go to Cambridge. So as Andy said, I think it's Andy, I chair the Department of Oncology there and I run the cancer centre there. But it's back to Katie. So we've had Katie, we've had Danny Thomas. And the third person I want to tell you about is someone right back at the beginning of my career. He was a miner, not a tiny person. A miner is someone who works down a mine. And this was in Newcastle upon Tyne. And I was a young medical student. I just got these terrible jobs as a young medical student. Well, I was a young medical student, and this chap, David, had lung cancer. And I had to go and tell David that he had lung cancer. And I'd only been asked to do this by the consultant because I'd got to know David. And I was really nervous. And I went in and we were chatting, having a cup of tea. And I said, David, I've got some terrible news. And he went, okay, fine. I said, I'm really sorry, but you've got lung cancer. And I will never forget the look of absolute relief that came over his face. And I couldn't understand that. I said, David, you've got lung cancer. He said, yes. I thought you were going to tell me I had TB. And we laugh, but actually that's because David had absolutely no fear of cancer. He had a fear of TB because his 7 siblings had died of it when he was a child. He didn't care about cancer. And at that moment, 9 years ago, I realized what we need to do is the imperative that is in more times in the Bible than anything else, which is fear not. So what we're going to do is remove the fear of cancer. So how are we doing that? So that was John. So how are we doing that? And that is through AI and machine learning. And everyone goes, AI and machine learning, yeah, we all do. But actually, it is fantastic. So 1 in 2 of us in this room will get cancer. Shocking statistic. 1 in 600 children will get cancer. Why is that? Why is it that children don't get cancer very often? And that is because children have a fundamental protective mechanism that my lab discovered a few years ago that stops children getting cancer. What if we were to be able to reactivate that in adults? So that your cells also said, no, I'm not going to get cancer either. Could we do that? Well, that's where AI and machine learning come in. The difficulty with children's cancer and the blessing of children's cancer is it's rare. 1 in 600 to 1 in 800 children will get cancer. So actually, if we want to study some of the diseases that I study in the brain tumors, is 2 children a year might get that in this country. You can't study a disease like that. But actually, if we could build a child in a computer who gets that cancer, I could create 1 million children. And so what we're doing at the moment by using at single cell level the information we're gathering from the normal nervous system of children and from mice and from frogs, yes, we use frogs, and from tumors, we're building avatars of people. And they develop cancer, and you can remove individual cells or individual genes. And then you can ask the question, what if I was to be able to remove this cell, what would happen? Would that cancer stop growing? We're doing that today at the moment. And actually the most exciting thing is that the last experiment we did, we went through this process and we released these Autobots onto the net and they crawl over all of these machine learning graphs and they go, actually you need to use this leukemia drug. And we're going, never use that. And we use it and our models never relapse. They never get cancer back. So there are 3 people, Katie, that pledge of 15% reduction in mortality, Danny Thomas and his faith that he showed, but also David and his fear of TB. Our dream is that someone will say, oh, thank goodness, I thought you were going to say I had cancer. And we'll be able to say, cancer's not to worry, we can deal with that. And that's my nunc dimittis. Thank you.